Hi, my name is Deanne Barr. I'm the author of such psychological thrillers as Expired Listings, Slashing Mona Lisa, and the upcoming Saving Grace, a domestic suspense, which will be out in October, but it is available for pre-sale right now on Amazon, so please go out and pick up a copy. Today I'm joined by Gary Hillard. He is a former child psychologist and he is a former school teacher, and understandably, his books involve children. He's written about 13 of them, and he's got some very definite thoughts on how we treat our children in this society and how we'd like them to be treated. I think you'll find it a very interesting interview. He certainly is a very interesting person. He's got his own publishing company, and he has some definite ideas of why he prefers self-publishing to being traditionally published. So sit back, enjoy, and as always, stay safe. Welcome to another edition of Author Groupie. I'm here with Gary Hillard. He's a prolific author with 13 books to his credit. He has retired after working as a child therapist and a school teacher. And his books are understandably revolve around children, many in foster care, which he says, where he says the most vulnerable kids are often forced to find their own way. Gary lives alone in a cabin on the side of a mountain and is traditionally and self-published. His latest, titled Anna, was published by his own company, Bear Hill Books, in May of this year. Did I get all that right, Gary?
You did.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. So welcome to Author Groupie.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So obviously you have strong feelings of how children are treated, yet as I understand it, you've had no formal education in writing. So what drew you to writing, and why fiction over nonfiction where children are concerned?
Well, I think a lot of it is that I've always seen myself as a storyteller, both in the office as a therapist. I use storytelling, and raising my own kids, I use storytelling. And Vermont's got some wonderful storytellers that you can see at festivals and at libraries and around. That's always been something that seemed really powerful to me. I don't have training to be a writer. I've got a bachelor's degree in social work, and then a master's degree in education, another one in social work, but very little exposure to any sort of language arts in any of those. They're all pretty much technical, skills-based programs. And so probably the last real English comp class I had was in high school back in the early 70s. So I don't have a lot of education on that. But I have a lot of stories, and I have a commitment to stories being a way to maybe tell truth you can't tell otherwise. I didn't want to write nonfiction books about child protection or foster care or child trauma, because there's a lot of those books out there written by people that are more versed in it than I am, that know more than I do. And hardly anyone reads them anyway. So what I wanted was something that people who weren't professionals, that didn't see themselves as a licensed therapist or psychologist or a person who did it for a living. I wanted folks who'd grown up in the system, people who were volunteering to care for children, school teachers who would bump into kids in their class that were in foster care. I wanted normal folks to have access to truths presented in a storytelling way around those kids. So, and the stories filled me to the brim anyway. I had to quit doing the work because I was filled to overflowing and really couldn't hold another one. So I burned out and retired early, and all those stories were still there. Wow. So that's why I write.
Very interesting. So what would you say are the main themes that run through your work?
Well, I think a lot of it is that we have an idea in our heads of what we wish children would be born into in terms of safety, parents who are ready for them, parents who are able to take care of them, kids who have a community around them that is interested and concerned and safe, protective, supportive. And I don't think very many kids get that. I think the culture is not terribly interested in children, in spite of what we tell ourselves. People that care for kids, either in classrooms or pediatricians or whatever, it's always up the lowest on the pay scale. We pay plastic surgeons a lot more than we pay pediatricians. And we pay a successful car salesman a lot more than we would pay a school teacher. So the culture, I think, doesn't value children very highly in spite of the lip service that's given to that. The transitions that we've been through with economics forcing most parents to work and it being pretty rare for a parent to be home with their kids has put a lot of stress on families. The income disparity, increasing poverty across the nation has put a lot of stress on children. Parents that work a job and a half frequently don't have a lot of great energy at the end of the day. Substance abuse has been a huge problem. And some of the traditional things that set kids up to be safe, which are predatory adults, usually in their family, usually in their life, friends or family. That's always been there and that's still there. And we do a pretty bad job of addressing that as well. So there's a lot of kids that hurt. I mean, the statistics are 1 out of 4 women, 1 out of 5 men will be sexually assaulted by the time they're 18. So pretty huge statistics. And you look at major cause of death in teenagers, it's suicide. So we know that what we're laying on the table isn't working very well for kids. And I feel a need to do something.
Well, you live alone in a cabin on the side of a mountain. Why have you chosen that life of isolation? Is it just to get away from all the depressing things you just laid out for me?
I don't know. It's funny. It's funny because what it would do, of course, is it would leave me stuck with them. Since I carry that with me, it isn't anything I could get away from. But I was married for 20 years, and when that ended, I just didn't really feel like trying it all over again. And that was about 20 years ago. So I have been single since then. The cabin on the hill is pretty much what I could afford. I started a school and ran a school for 5.5 years, which is a huge way to throw away an enormous amount of money. Maybe the most fun you can have with $500,000, but at some point it's all gone. And so I found myself without a whole lot of income and really couldn't work anymore. So this is what I can afford. And it's pretty awesome for a writer. It's quiet, it's undisturbed. There's killer views to the south. I can see 70 miles out to Killington. Most of the noise around here is birdsong. It's super pretty, and I love being here.
Well, it's true that a lot of us writers spend a lot of money for a retreat like you're already in. So you beat us to it. How has the pandemic affected your life or your writing? And did you even notice there was one because you're so isolated?
It's a great question. I'm in Vermont, and Vermont's probably the safest state in the union right now in terms of both low cases and in terms of a population that has pretty aggressively moved towards social distancing, masks, testing, being really cautious. Vermont's got it as much under control as any place does. And of course, I'm isolated up here. There hasn't been a person in my cabin since March. I entertain in the yard and out on the porch. So it's easy for me to be as safe as I can here. In some ways, the connections I had, I swam at a public pool. I went to the library every day they were open. I went to the thrift store, went to a coffee shop. I don't do those things anymore. So I miss what little socialization I had. And of course, as I isolate, I'm literally isolating by myself. My brother has goodness gracious, he's got 3 kids and a wife and a dog. So when he's isolating, it's noisy and friendly and there's lots of people there. And I'm just by myself. So that's different.
And you've been able to keep writing?
Yeah, I got knocked out for a while there. I had a heart attack and that scared me. And that was kind of in the midst of that first couple months of the pandemic. So between those two things, my brain was too frazzled to be creative. It was just kind of down in survivor mode for a while. But it's come back, and I've got another book I'm 3 chapters into at this point, and So it's starting to click again.
Well, good. I'm glad you're okay.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
One of your books is traditionally published. The others are all self-published. Why did you move to self-publishing?
Well, I wrote easily. I wrote 4 or 5 hours a day, and it was oftentimes the most pleasant part of the day. There was no agony. There was no tearing my hair out. And I started stacking books up, and I had 5 or 6 that I felt good about. And then I thought, well, I'll see if I can find a publisher for those. And then I started this process of blindly submitting my books to various publishers using internet resources that kept track of who was open for unsolicited manuscripts, who might be looking for this theme or that theme. And it was just heartbreaking. It hurt my creativity and my mood so much. I decided I'd only do it 1 day a week, and I'd only do it for like 4 places. That was the goal. And I did 4 a week, and hardly ever heard back from anyone. And occasionally you'd get something back and you'd be like, oh, we certainly enjoyed your submission. While we found your work interesting, it does not meet the niche we're trying to fill right at this moment. Please keep us in mind for future submissions. Or more often you would just hear nothing. So there's no indication that anyone was reading what I sent. And I'm not sure the way publishing works now, which is largely large corporate publishing, that it's very easy to get in unless you have an agent, or unless you're known, or unless you have some connections, which of course I don't have. So I felt super lucky to get my first publisher. Black Rose is a small independent press down in Texas. But the process of getting published was so slow, it seemed to take maybe a year for them to digest and cough up the first book. And by then I had 7 or 8 books done. And I thought, well, gee, if I do this, I'm probably going to be dead before all these things get up there. So I wanted something faster, and I chatted some with them, and they were really unable to do more than, one occasionally. And so I started doing them up through Amazon. And that's actually been really pleasant. It costs almost nothing. I've got a friend in Taos that helps me package things and put the covers together. And it's been really nice. And I have control over it. I can buy author copies for like $3.50, $4. I sell them down at the thrift store. There's a coffee shop in town that sells them. And they're selling on Amazon. They're selling heavily in Australia, in Spain, in Canada, in Britain. And there's no way I'd have access to any of those things if it wasn't for that platform. So I like the fact that it's weirdly international. I don't know how that worked. But yeah, most of my sales are out of the country at this point.
Really?
Yeah.
So what do you think are the main challenges of being self-published, and how have you overcome them?
The scariest thing, I think, is that as soon as you put that little button on, I want to publish a book, there's a dozen hungry wolves that sniff you out and have a paw on your wallet and want to help. But at the same time, we're probably going to charge you $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, $7,000, $10,000. And there's not a whole lot of indication that any of that buys a whole lot. So I found what felt like a predatory industry out there, eager to help me if I would front up $1,000 or $2,000. And I just, that was really discouraging to me. That's the hardest part. The Amazon stuff is fairly easy. They walk you right through it. Writing to me is a habit like anything else. I get up early in the morning. I write for 3 or 4 hours. I don't stress as to whether it's good or not. I pile sand, in the words of Stephen King. He says, spend your days piling sand, carve the sand castles out later. Because if you have the editor in your head, like, oh, I don't think that's very good, or someone won't like that, or that's not well said. If you have that in your head, you'll grind to a halt, and you'll be one of those people that wishes they could write, but doesn't manage to do it. And I don't want to do that.
Yeah, a good friend of mine told me for my first book, vomit it out and you'll
Yeah,
figure out what you have and then you can work on it later.
absolutely. And I think you're truer, particularly if you're coming at it from a storytelling from the heart standpoint. I think the editor actually gets in the way of quality. I think if you've got authentic stories inside you, the more welcoming you are to them as they come out, the nicer the product's going to be.
Well, speaking of authentic stories, since you are involved in your subject matter, what parts of you come out in your book, and are you comfortable with what comes out?
Well, it's the first book I wrote was Bet's Best, and it's one of a three trilogy of books. Follows Bet's from age 7 up to 17. Uh, and I'm all over the place in that book. I'm the good therapist who's still wet behind the ears. I'm the bad, burned out therapist who doesn't know when to keep her mouth shut and constantly says the wrong thing. I'm the kid herself, trying to make sense of the world and feeling hurt and thinking a lot about maybe some of it's my fault, maybe it isn't. I mean, I felt so much a part of that series of books. And I've seen that in all my writing, that there are characters in them that are not necessarily just people I've known or situations I've known about, but parts of myself that get to kind of come to life through the writing. And that's been really fun. I'm excited to see that. That's makes it exciting.
Sure. Now, you said a little bit about your pace, that you write 4 or 5 hours a day. I know you put out a book about one every 6 months. Do you write from an outline?
No, I'm just starting a new book, and I can sort of tell you what the start is like. I was on vacation for 2 weeks. I finished up the most recent one, which is Jessica Jett Takes Off. That should actually go up on Amazon as of either tonight or tomorrow. So that's like popping out there. But there's 2 weeks in which I was just done, and I didn't have anything to edit because I was done with Jessica, and I didn't have anything to write because it wasn't coming. And so I just kicked back. I worked in the garden. I did some projects around the cabin. I rode the motorcycle. I rode the bicycle. I went swimming. And I considered it like a vacation. I knew at some point it would end. And about a week ago, a kid turned up. And it's a kid who seems to have maybe an anxiety disorder. She's living with her grandmother. There's some event in the past that I think has to do with cars and a bad exhaust. She's got a friend she's sitting with on the school bus that's kind of quirky. So there's a story starting to come. And what I do is I welcome the story in and try to pay attention and write what I see and hear. And it's always a story. I didn't used to trust that, but now I trust it because it's been happening over and over.
Sure. Well, many authors, myself included, find that gaining exposure and finding an audience is even more challenging than writing the book. How do you go? I know you said you have some international readers, but how do you go about finding your readers? And do you ever venture outside your cabin and do in-person appearances, COVID aside?
Well, I think the short answer for how I do that is very poorly. I've always been bad at marketing myself, my products, my anything. When I ran a school, I was bad at marketing it. It's talking about myself and why people should like that has never felt comfortable to me. I don't have much salesman in me. And I don't have a team that's doing that for me. So it's limited. I put the books out and I've hoped that the stories would catch people. And in a very small, slow scale, they do. I dropped a pile of books off at the library in Bethel, which is a little town south of here by about 10 miles, little tiny library. And you know, the librarian was like, oh no, when I came in because I had this big pile of books and she figured I was emptying the attic or something. But I explained they were books that I'd written and that I'd like to donate them and she could check them out because I like libraries. And she took them, and then she got back to me. She's like, I really like, she'd read one of them. She'd read the Buckman Kids. I really like this book, and I want to have it be the book we do for our next book club. Can I get more copies? I was like, sure. So I brought down a stack of copies. And they read The Buckman Kids, which is an early 60s dairy farm, successful family meets kids of a really unsuccessful family that moves in next door. And it's the friendship and relationships between those two sets of kids. Most of the people who were reading it were native Vermont people, many of whom had grown up on dairy farms. So it was super close to their heart, and they loved it. And they had a successful read, and then we met together over cookies and tea for an hour outside with masks on and talked about the book. And there's a repeat of that coming at the Brookfield Library, which is my local here. I've done those things. The coffee shop sells my books. I go to the farmer's market on Saturdays and I sell my books for 4 hours. I meet people. I get return business, which feels good. Somebody buys one week and then they come back the next week and buy another one. And Amazon is doing whatever it is it does. I mean, you can call up a little report thing and it tells you what the sales are for the day. And I'm selling 5, 6 books a day, usually on Amazon in different countries. And that's, I get a check probably 150 to 200 bucks a month from Amazon. I make another 3 kind of under the table at the farmer's market. And it's good. I mean, I'm not buying Ferraris or anything yet, but it's a little sales and it helps and it's fun and people seem to like the books.
That's
so
great.
All of that feels good.
You're doing a lot better than a lot of authors who are marketing more traditionally. So don't, go down on yourself. I think that what you're doing is great.
Well, I'm having fun anyway.
That's the most important thing.
Excuse me. I'm not worried too much about it.
That's great. Well, let me ask you a question. Have any children or those formerly in foster care, any of the children you worked with ever reached out to you and either praise or dispute parts of your books?
I am not sure the books are necessarily child friendly because they are about kid trauma. I think you'd want to be 11 or 12 or 13 to read them.
But they're adults now, these kids that you worked with before. So I'm just wondering if any of them read your books and then after the fact got back to you.
I have not heard from children I had as foster kids, and I'm not in touch with ex-clients. I don't have a way of, once you're done, you're done. So I don't know what goes on in their lives now.
Fair enough. Well, would you like to read a few pages from your most recent book, Anna?
Sure. Anna's an interesting one to read from because it's kind of a thriller, and I dug a little bit to find a piece that wouldn't give away too much because there's a lot of stuff happening. But primarily there's 3 characters involved. There's you're introduced at the beginning of the book to this retired couple who dropped their youngest child off at college. They're driving back at like 2 a.m. They're squabbling like older married couples can do sometimes. The woman is stewing on the roommate that her daughter has and whether it's a good girl or not. The gentleman's thinking about deer coming out of the highway. So their brains are like really on 2 different things. So David's the guy, and there's a chunk. The 3rd character, of course, is Anna, and here's Anna. Anna's the kid that they find in a burning semi truck as they're driving home, and she's on the run in a real serious way, and they take her in and hide her, which changes their life completely and upturns everything that they ever thought was normal. But this is a little view of David. It's in chapter 9. The kid's in the house. She's like not what they're used to. Things are falling apart. But chapter 9, David stood in the garage. He could feel this new life comfortably slipping into habits and patterns of their old life, and he worried. He wondered about what would happen once Brenda, the last daughter, was finally off to college and mostly on her own. He doubted that his own life would change much, puttering as he did around the house, taking care of the cars, the lawn, the systems of the house that needed maintenance and occasional repair. His readings about the Civil War would continue. His retirement had simply meant that those tasks were spread out over the week, rather than pressed into the weekend. The time finally to do things right. David took pleasure in the level of care that things around him received. The Lexus, not only spotless with fresh fluids kept perfectly topped up, but even the engine, the battery, the wires, the hoses were cleaned, wiped down weekly and polished. Doors swung on oiled hinges and latched with easy precision. The lawn looked like a decorated pool table, with the garage mower shiny on top and sharp as a razor below. Tools were clean, each cleaned and wiped with a bit of oil after use and safely put away in the proper spot. David had discovered that the light fixtures, both inside and out, could use some attention, and now they were as clean as the plates and cups. He missed his daughter, Brenda, but he took pleasure in the fact that his last daughter had gone on to college, successfully launched like the older two. Parenting was not unlike the other tasks he'd thrown himself into, and felt happy to have done well and be done with. David was not unfeeling, and he loved his daughters very much, but his natural sense of order and desire for completion defined his parenting as well as his garage and basement. He thought raising girls was hard, uncertain work. Bonnie was different. She loved her career, talking about her patients every night in a way that David never felt tempted to bring home. She talked mostly about their feelings, not their illness, but rather their fear, their loneliness, and hope. He'd listen, more interested really in Bonnie's excitement than the lives and feelings of the patients or the coworkers that spilled into the dinner conversations and their walks. Sometimes she'd test him and ask about a person or a situation she'd mentioned the day before, and would laugh as he tried to cover his inattention. She once asked us if he even listened, and he'd honestly told her that he simply watched. He watched her being proud, angry, confused, passionate in her work, and he loved her feelings so much that he had little left over for the actual things that happened. David had grown up on a small dairy farm in Dalbo, Minnesota. His Lutheran parents never raised their voices, not even when whipping their children. Bonnie was his chance at seeing the world of feelings, which he admired from a distance. So that's a little clue about David, who's probably a little like me in some ways, and Bonnie, who's probably a little like me in some ways too.
Very interesting. Sounds good.
Well, thank you.
So this is currently available on Amazon. All your books are on Amazon. Are they sold anywhere else? Are they distributed anywhere else?
They're sold at the Huggable Mug coffee store in Randolph, Vermont. They're sold at the Randolph Farmers Market every Saturday between 9 and 1.
Okay.
And that's about it. Yeah.
Okay, and I noticed that some of them are on Kindle Unlimited.
Yep. The first one, Bet's Best, is on Kindle Unlimited.
So that's, yeah.
I don't think I'm going to put the others on that, because it turns out if you do that, you can't make them available through the library's overdrive system, which means people can't check out the Kindle. And of course, with the COVID thing, a lot of people like me are getting most of our library books through email.
Me too.
I want them to be available, so I probably won't do the unlimited thing on the other books.
Yeah, I'm a big subscriber to Libby, which is
Yeah.
Overdrive's new name. It's a great service.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining me. I appreciate your time. The books sound great. I hope that the new book that you're coming out with tonight does well along with the others.
I appreciate it.
No problem. Please stay safe.
Thank you. You too. Appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Over the river to the city.